Hi guys. So I want to talk today about the dangers of clean eating as a kind of approach to fat loss in particular, but also as an approach to overall health and wellness. Now, this probably sounds a bit weird, but the whole premise of clean eating assumes that there is such thing as perfection, and that we can eat perfectly all the time. Now, if our eating decisions existed within a vacuum, then this is like ideal. This is exactly how we should eat. We should eat clean, unprocessed foods that have no chemicals or sugar or anything that might be bad for us. It sounds ideal, right? But the problem is that we don't live within a vacuum. We live busy lives. We go to events and parties and social gatherings. We sometimes get tired and bored. We have lived, most of us, 20 or 30 years with imperfect foods going into our body. There's temptation all around. If we lived in an environment where you could only get fresh, healthy foods, then maybe this would be ideal. If you live on a if you go to a retreat and there's only a certain type of food to eat, then you don't have any choice. Even if you do crave the bad things, you can't eat them. And what I think often ends up happening is that, and the kind of the main thing that concerns me is that so many women try to eat perfectly and try to eat clean all the time, and then when they inevitably fail, they then beat themselves up for it, as though they did something wrong, and as though they failed in some way. And my issue is that most of us will not be able to eat perfectly all the time, and so aiming to eat perfectly all the time sets us up for failure and sets us up for disappointment. Because when we do fail, we're going to feel bad. When we come off of that clean eating, we feel bad about ourselves. And the way it looks for most women that try to do clean eating is that they eat really, really, really well for a period of time, and then there's this inevitable backlash because because something happened, or normally they were just exposed to temptation. And sometimes like pure motivation and force of will can get us through a period of time eating in a certain way. But then when that motivation runs out, when the novelty wears off, when things spring up in our lives, or when we just really, really crave something, or when the wrong time of the month comes around, we fall back. We'll have a slip up. This is how it looks for most women, and sometimes that period of time that we manage to push ourselves through it is just a matter of hours. Sometimes it's just like, a lot of women eat clean, have, the cycle of clean eating then crashing varies. For some women, it's a matter of hours and like half a day that they eat really, really, really well. And then the evening comes and they're tired and they haven't eaten enough and they've overdone it and they're stressed, and then they crash and they eat crap. And this happens on a daily basis. They eat really well during the day and really badly in the evening. For some women, it's like a weekly basis, like they eat really, really clean all week, and then the weekend comes around and they just eat all the food. Sometimes it's longer periods, but it doesn't matter. It's a cycle of like trying to attain perfection, and then failing and slipping up. And when I'm suggesting a different approach to eating, I'm not condoning or kind of glorifying eating badly. I'm just coming from a point, or coming from a perspective where perfection is not the goal, and where acceptance of our infallibility and of our humanness is kind of is built into the program. So I'm a really big fan of Sohee Fit, who talks a lot about about this kind of stuff, and about reverse dieting and about flexible dieting. And I found that it really, really works for me too. That by and I'm really grateful to her to introducing me to this, and all the credit goes to her. You know, go check this stuff out on her website. But what's really worked for me is the 80-20 rule. Just simply aiming for like 80% of the time eating wholesome, clean, nutritious foods, good quality foods, as good quality as I can afford or that I can get hold of, and then the other 20% of the time allowing for those slip-ups. But they're not slip-ups if you've kind of factored them in from the beginning. So and I prefer to think of it in terms of like non-negotiables, which is also something that Sohee talks about. Rather than it being a slip-up, it's just a non-negotiable. Many people are really concerned about dairy and cow's milk, for example, nowadays. But for me, a milky coffee once a day is a non-negotiable. I don't want to live without it. I just enjoy it so much. Likewise, something sweet, something with sugar in it once a day doesn't send me down a slippery slope. It's just something that I enjoy, and then I move on with my life. The occasional hamburger or the occasional bit of junk food, like just a Domino's pizza, is not something that has to derail us. And when we look at it that way, as in this is just part of the plan and then I'm moving on with my life, it doesn't become so earth-shattering, and it doesn't become something that derails us or that makes us feel bad about ourselves, or that made us even feel like we failed in any way. We just eat the bad thing and then move on, but we don't see it as bad. We just see it as like a small part of what we of just that built-in 20% where we're not perfect, and this keeps us on a diet that maybe isn't optimal in terms of like I said, like eating clean and eating perfectly maybe is optimal for nutrition, but the best diet is the one that you can do. So what I'm saying is, like, if you are already, eating clean and it's working well for you and you're never slipping up and like your life is perfect and you're perfect, like, well done, pat on the back, like, carry on doing that. Don't start doing what I'm suggesting, because if it's working for you, great. Like, I admire you and you're amazing. But for most of us, myself included, like, we're not perfect and we can't make those perfect choices all the time. And when we do have when we have the slip ups, and when we see them as slip ups, it just sends us down a slippery slope, and it triggers us, and it can be really, really detrimental to our psychological health as well as our physical health, because if it sends us down this slippery slope, we can continue eating the bad things. Whereas if you just see it as like, okay, cool, I'm going to have a piece of cake and then I'm going to carry on with my life. I'm going to have a chocolate bar and then I'm going to carry on with my life. I'm going to have like a protein bar that obviously is not like optimum nutrition, but it tastes good and it gives me some protein and like whatever. Like, and then I'm going to, at lunchtime or dinner time, whatever, I'm going to have a really healthy salad with organic chicken and, brown rice. they don't negate one another. You can mix it in. And so if you're struggling, if you've tried clean eating and like me, you're not perfect and you can't stick to that perfect nutrition plan all the time, then maybe giving this 80-20 flexible dieting thing a shot might be in your best interest. You might, if you can maintain it, it's probably going to be healthier for you in the long run than doing this whole kind of like, I've got to be perfect and stand to certain stand up to certain standards and then mess up and then go back to like this perfect and then mess up. It may end up averaging out the same, but it isn't so detrimental to your mental well-being. Just allowing yourself to enjoy food sometimes and not always not have this pressure like every single food choice has to be for my best health. Like sometimes it can be for other reasons. Sometimes it can be for taste. And I think that this is something that's worked for me and that I feel really, really good about. And ultimately, I've maintained a far healthier weight and far healthier lifestyle eating this way. Every time I try to restrict myself really, really really strictly, I always end up crashing and having a bit of a binge. Maybe nowadays it's not so much of a binge for me, but just kind of overdoing it. I end up, just for a few days not being able to really control myself and not really feeling very good off the back of it. Whereas if I maintain the 80-20 thing, it just always keeps going for me and never kind of falls back. You're allowed to have, like I said, one really good strategy is non-negotiables. Another really helpful strategy is abstention. You don't have, not everything has to be in moderation. You're allowed to abstain from things. I abstain from alcohol because I find that I just end up eating crap and it doesn't make me feel good. It affects my sleep, which then affects my food choices and so on and so forth. And you're allowed to have things that you don't touch for one reason or another, and normally it's because it triggers you into a really, really unhealthy cycle. But you can't abstain from everything. You can't abstain from sugar and alcohol and dairy and wheat and gluten and all of these things because it's just not maintainable. Some people will be able to maintain this. Like I said before, more power to you. But not necessarily all of these things in a certain dosage are necessarily bad for us. So that's a whole other video blog. So ultimately, I'm sure lots of people will disagree with this approach, but again, the most successful diet is the one that you will do. And for many of us, I think that factoring in for imperfection is a really, and allowing ourselves to be that way, forgiving ourselves for being imperfect, is actually a really great strategy for success in the long run. And that you should give it a try and see if it works for you. I hope this was helpful. Feel free to comment below. Subscribe to my page if you want more videos like this. I'll be talking more and more about nutrition topics and fat loss in particular. And let me know if there's any particular questions that you want answered. Thanks for listening. Bye.